As we consider not just the question of Matt Gaetz, but some of the other more controversial nominees that this new Senate and the newly elected incoming Senate majority are going to have to be grappling with, how many senators do you think confidently will be willing to vote against the president-elect on something like this without fearing for what it could mean for themselves if they're facing re-election fights in the years to come?
Yeah, for me, I look at first, so Republicans would have to have 4 senators that would vote against this. The top suspects, I would say, are Lisa Murkowski of Alaska and Susan Collins, sort of known as the more moderates of the Senate. Now, Collins is up for re-election, of course, in 2026, but she's the only Republican running in 2026 in a state Kamala Harris carried. She managed to sort of defy the electoral trends when she won in 2020. But again, she has probably more problem from the left than she would have to worry about a primary challenge, I think, at this point. And Murkowski sort of always marched to the beat of her own drum. She's not up for re-election again until 2028. And then I kind of look at possible retirements and people who might buck the president. And Mitch McConnell is atop that list, actually. He's no longer the Senate Majority Leader. He stepped down from leadership, and it's widely expected that he probably won't run again in 2026. So he sort of might be more unencumbered. So then I look at where the next possible people could be. Is it someone like Bill Cassidy, who is up in 2026, but he's a possible retirement watch? He voted to impeach Trump. Is it someone like Todd Young of Indiana that's also sort of gone against MAGA at times? Or maybe it's someone that was just elected, like John Curtis from Utah. Does he kind of remain in that sort of more moderate lane like his predecessor Mitt Romney did?
Well, while we're naming names and counting votes here, Jessica, this is fascinating to think about the way this could go. There's a broader question about whether we should be taking Donald Trump literally, if I can use that phrase, when it comes to all of these nominations. If Matt Gaetz is somehow a sacrificial play or a negotiating ploy. We've been hearing more and more over the past couple of days that no, he expects John Thune and Donald Trump Jr. reinforced this message on Sunday morning television, that they are expected to pass, to confirm all of these names. What's your thought on that as we continue to fill out the cabinet here?
I mean, we typically see that there's at least one nominee for any president, that there's things in their background or different things that come up. And Matt Gaetz is obviously the one that comes up the most with, you were talking about just before this, with the House Ethics Committee investigation. I mean, there's questions very much about allegations of sexual misconduct and different things. And then, of course, there are with Pete Hegseth, too, allegations with him for a Secretary of Defense. So all of these things do come up in a confirmation hearing where the minority party can call witnesses. And when you have someone like Matt Gaetz that hasn't done a lot to make friends even on his side of the aisle, I think that's just where the difficulties come, that there is probably just a limit to trying to get some of these people through.
Well, they might have more success with someone like, say, current Senator Marco Rubio, who has been tapped for Secretary of State, of course, is expected to resign to take up those duties, assuming that he is confirmed. We heard from Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis about the replacement for Rubio today. He said he wants to have someone named by the beginning of January, described someone as who will help Trump deliver on his election mandate, be strong on immigration and border security, take on the entrenched bureaucracy, has a proven record of results, he also said. Jessica, do you have an idea of who actually could be keeping this seat warm for the next 2 years?
Yeah, I don't expect Rubio to face backlash. In fact, I expect that he would actually probably get several Democratic votes as well. He's very much sort of an establishment type pick that we would see from any there. You know, the question is this a seat that Ron DeSantis wants to run for himself in 2026 when he's term limited? Does he appoint someone like his chief of staff, James Utheimer, there to fill the seat temporarily when he could run again? Now, we saw Charlie Crist sort of try this and then was sort of foiled by Rubio himself. By winning that primary and Crist having to run as an independent and then losing. So we've seen this play out before. I would look to the lieutenant governor there, Jeanette Nunez, too, and the attorney general, Ashley Moody, are also mentioned. They are also in the mix for, again, we have an open gubernatorial race in 2026 as well, but that would be a part of a consideration. And then, of course, the name that's getting all of the, push is Laura Trump there. That you already have, like Alabama Senator Katie Britt coming out and saying that she would back her, with sort of the enemies that DeSantis made when he primaried Trump. Picking a Trump to fill this seat could go a long way, but then that could foil any potential plans that DeSantis might wonder about running for the seat himself when he's out of a job in 2 years.
Yeah, boy, there's a lot there. I'm going to ask you about Pennsylvania as well. It's going to a recount, Jessica. David McCormick is already in Washington. How much time will this take, and what should we expect to come out of this process? Is there a chance that this changes the outcome?
Well, I think what they're wrangling over now is, a decision of whether ballots that don't have the date written correctly could count. That's what Casey's team is pushing for. The state Supreme Court just emphasized that they cannot. Well, we'll see if they appeal that further in different things. But, these types of typical recounts, if we don't see them change, I think the number of votes, it comes down to these provisional ballots and ballots that are whether they can be counted that would have enough of a change. I think it's still very, very hard for Casey to overcome this. And, David McCormick is the senator-elect at this point as we see it. Can stranger things happen? Yes. And Democrats continue to say they still see a path. But McCormick is here, as you said, in Washington, sort of going through that orientation as well. And, by the Associated Press count and other news organizations, that it is officially 4 seats that Republicans have flipped to give them that 53-47 majority that we're anticipating in the next Congress.
Mm-hmm.
So that will be the majority, at least until 2026. But I want to ask you about an election that takes place before then as well, Jessica. Next year, the New Jersey gubernatorial race is a field that is getting more crowded. We learned today that Congresswoman Democrat Mikey Sherrill is jumping into the race after the Congressman Josh Gottheimer announced he would as well just last week. I believe there's 4 other Democrats in the running. There's at least 4 Republicans as well. How much more crowded is this field going to get?
That's a very good question. I think, this is when we see these candidates sort of make their moves. And really, this is kind of a free primary to run in. Normally, if you're running for governor, you would have to step down from your seat. You don't have to do that in this instance since it's an off-year election. So they're kind of given a little bit of a free pass. And, that's a seat that Democrats have held, an open seat there that Republicans, again, Trump had a much smaller, he came closer in New Jersey than anyone expected. So Republicans are seeing a little bit of optimism there. But we typically see that these off-year elections, especially after a presidential year, are more of a backlash to the incumbent president's party. Not only does New Jersey have a governor's race next year, but Virginia does as well, where Glenn Youngkin is term limited there. The governor can only serve 1 consecutive term. So you have Democrat Abigail Spanberger, who just left Congress in order to run. She wanted to focus on her race for governor. And then we also had today that the Republican Attorney General Jason Miara said that he is going to run for re-election to his seat. So that clears the way for the Lieutenant Governor, Winsome Sears, to be it looks like she, as of now, is largely unopposed in the Republican primary. So that would be historic in Virginia to have a woman versus a woman for the seat in a state that's never elected a female governor. And Winsome Sears there, if she wins, she would be the first Black woman elected governor as well.